As investment banking recruiting season kicks off, how are you supposed to keep track of dozens, sometimes hundreds of firms? It can be a lot of information to handle. Thankfully, our sponsor, WSO Academy, just announced something big for the summer. If you apply to the program and submit a first-round interview, you'll get free access for 1 year to their coveted high finance application tracker. You'll get this for free even if you don't join the program. Now, this is a limited time offer because it's usually only available to Academy students, but you can check it out now by joining the WSO Academy waitlist today with a link in the show notes, or go to wallstreetoasis.com/academy.
Have people, heading into kind of the final stage of trying to break in is, you want to know yourself, you want to know your story, you want to focus on the big picture, which is, being able to tell a story to investment bankers, recruiters at these firms of, hey, here's what I really liked about my previous experiences before business school. Here's what I'm really good at, and here's how that is going to translate in investment banking. It's going to be a little bit of a different story for everyone. But you just want to make it a succinct, logical, believable, if you will, plausible story. Another thing that folks want to focus on is
All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights, the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. My name is Alex Mason. I'm your host, and I have a very special guest here with me today, Jon Paris from Lincoln International. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Good to see you.
Yeah. Great to see you as well, as always. And how's everything going in Chicago lately?
Things are going well. We're enjoying the fall weather, the last remnants of that right now, and looking forward to a hopefully successful year over here at Lincoln International. It's been an interesting market over the last couple of years, but looking relatively positive for the end of the year and heading into 2025 and beyond.
Yeah. Awesome to hear that. And, just for context for the listeners, Jon is Director of Talent at Lincoln International, also investment banker at Lincoln International in the past. And so just really excited to talk with you today, Jon, because you have a wealth of knowledge, both in terms of your experience as a banker, kind of rising through the ranks yourself, and also as someone who's focused on hiring and looking at candidates looking to get into banking over at Lincoln. So yeah, really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, very happy to be here and happy to share my perspectives with the listeners.
Awesome. So I think it would be great to start at the beginning. So what were you doing professionally kind of right out of college? Kind of start with undergrad. What was your major? What were you studying? What were your thoughts about your career back in those days? And kind of take us there. What were you doing?
Yeah. So thinking back to my undergraduate days, which is a while ago, I went to the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm originally from the Kansas City suburbs, so that was always kind of the hometown school. I was actually a liberal arts major. Was kind of triple majoring in political science, international studies, and psychology. And so I bounced around all over the place during undergrad trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and thought that I was going to become a lawyer and work in international law, international relations, but had an internship actually at the United Nations in Switzerland when I was in undergrad, which was really interesting. And it sounds a lot cooler than it actually was in terms of the actual impact I was able to make. And so I realized very quickly that while I found international relations and politics to be interesting from a personal perspective, figured out pretty quickly that I wanted nothing to do with that from an actual career perspective. And so I decided pretty much the last semester of my senior year that I wanted to go into finance and investments. I had a really interesting class that I took during my very last semester with a really great professor, and it just kind of all clicked that finance, the world of investment management, broadly speaking, was what I thought would be the best fit. And so, unfortunately, I had zero internships in that space. No, had done very little any networking, had no connections to speak of, and so really kind of started at ground zero, coming out of school, which is not the path I would recommend to any of the listeners these days. The undergraduate institutions are very, very sophisticated in terms of career placement, and especially grooming students for finance and accounting type careers, which is good for all of the younger folks these days. But in any event, in terms of my career, I literally tried to find any job that I could coming out of undergrad that had the word finance or investments in it. That's about as sophisticated as my career search was at the time. And I was able to land kind of a back office investment accounting type job that was painfully boring, but it was something. Was able to get my foot into the door to the broader world of finance and investment management. Then I was able to parlay that. I kind of was instantly looking for the next opportunity from the very beginning. I was able to parlay one back office job into a better back office job at a hedge fund called Citadel, which used to be based here in Chicago and is now down in Miami. It was still not where I wanted, but was a really interesting firm doing a lot of exciting things, and it was a much more interesting and challenging role. And it was at that point that I started to think about business school, and so I took the GMAT and I started preparing for all of that, and was ready to make a career switch. With the idea of getting out of the back office and becoming some kind of financial analyst. And then, interestingly enough, as I was preparing to apply to business schools and go through that whole experience, I networked my way into basically another entry-level job that was being a financial analyst for a group called Prudential Capital, which is effectively what you would now call private credit. Prudential Capital is one of the investment management arms of the big Prudential insurance empire. And so what I was doing there was working on small deal teams where we were evaluating, making recommendations on international private placement debt investments. And so that was really my entry into the world of high finance, if you want to call it that. And so that was a really great firm and a really interesting opportunity. That was basically what I had always hoped to get coming out of undergrad, and just took me a few years to get there. And so I kind of hit the reset button on my career prior to business school, as opposed to having to use business school to do that. And so I think that kind of brings you up to date in terms of how I kind of originally started my career in finance.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jon. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because you have this liberal arts background. I mean, triple major, like that's incredible in and of itself. But you were really interested in kind of getting into that world, and were able to kind of stepping stone your way into something that you found exciting, right? And so with this job right before business school, it sounds like you enjoyed it. We're learning some things about finance that you didn't really have exposure to in your back office roles. What was it that made you say, okay, I still want to go get my MBA now. I still want to do something different. What kind of led to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So at Prudential Capital was kind of a 3 to 4 year pre-MBA type program back then. Not all that different from like an investment banking analyst position here at Lincoln or some of our other competitors. And so while I really liked that firm and loved the position, I was doing fundamental analysis of companies, learning about all kinds of different companies and industries, and working on deals, which I found interesting. I I realized after that in this world of high finance, investment banking, private equity, hedge funds, at the time, this is back in 2008, 2009, 2010 time period. Virtually everyone who is one of the senior folks at Prudential Capital and other places like that had MBAs from places like Chicago Booth and Kellogg here in Chicago, where I'm based, and Cornell Johnson and other top 10 MBA programs. It was very much customary at the time to go back and get an MBA in order to continue moving up the chain in that world. And so I don't want to say it was a check the box type item, but it felt like it was kind of a necessary step to kind of keep moving up. But also, as I mentioned earlier, I was a liberal arts major. I'd taken some business and finance classes and some accounting classes, but the MBA was also an opportunity to really kind of formalize my business education. After maturing a bit and having more experience that's actually applicable to that education. And then the other big value, I should say, that I saw in the MBA that I heard from, getting exposed to all these other senior folks at Prudential who had gone the same route, is there's just tremendous benefits for the long-term value of your career from all the networking, where you get, as you've found, I'm sure, at Cornell Johnson, you come into one of these top MBA programs and you meet all these other young and interesting people who have been highly successful in all kinds of different areas of the business world, and then are scattering off into all of the high-powered jobs throughout the business world, whether it's C-suite type positions for corporates, consulting, investment banking, private equity, marketing. And so I thought that would be a really interesting opportunity to just significantly broaden my network. And so that was kind of the primary reasons to go back to school.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And it resonates with me because it's some of the same reasons for why I wanted to do it. I think it was more from a career pivot perspective, but also just the things that you were talking about: networking, meeting interesting people who are on similar paths or on very different paths, but people that I can learn from. And, so far it's definitely been, exceeded my expectations. So what were things like at, excuse me, what were things like at Kellogg? And when you were there, you got into this amazing MBA program, you're learning. It sounds like you were still motivated to continue down the path of being a professional investor. What were some things that happened there, and what was it like in terms of your recruiting journey as an MBA and immediately thereafter?
Yeah, so Kellogg was a blast. It's a very fun-loving business school, very social in nature, which fit well with my personality. But also, everything you expect from kind of a top MBA program, where it's a world-class education. But more than that, most of the learning I gained, I think, or got, was from the other classmates, where you're sitting in groups and you're talking to people late at night, and it's like, okay, what explain to me, what does a consultant actually do? And you're talking to former consultants who will tell you exactly what they're doing. You're not getting kind of the the fluffy salesy pitch that you would get from recruiters. And so really enjoyed the experience at Kellogg. I had a blast, learned a tremendous amount, and significantly expanded my network, if we're thinking about, from the selfish professional perspective. And then in terms of recruiting, I was in an interesting position where I really liked my job prior to business school, and seriously considered going back, actually, but wanted to use the MBA as an opportunity to shop around, which I feel like is getting a little bit more difficult as time goes on. Just given how quickly recruiting starts up after you join an MBA program. But in any event, I wanted to use that opportunity to shop around a little bit to see what else was out there in the world of finance. And I kind of figured, worst case scenario, try and go back to the same company I was at before or a similar one, just at ideally a higher position. And so I, unlike a lot of people, at least most of the people that were on campus, I spent September, October, and the early part of November exploring. And so I looked at all of the, most common areas within the world of finance, corporate development, private equity, venture capital. Interestingly enough, if there was one thing that I was pretty sure I did not want to do, it was investment banking. And the reason for that was that my understanding or exposure to investment banking was all bulge bracket investment banks, very large global platforms with their hands in everything, just massive organizations. And also, if you think back to the time, this is 2010, 2011, there were a couple of things that were negative about the investment banking industry, not all that long before 2010, there was the global financial crisis where you had some massive investment banks, spectacularly fail in a short period of time and almost tank the entire global economy. And so I think the public reputation of investment banking was probably at an all-time low at this time. Also, not to pick on bulge brackets, but thinking about what bulge brackets were like back in 2010, it was a very old school, Wall Street, sharp elbowed, rough and tumble, crazy work-life balance or lack thereof. And that is, I didn't find that the least bit appealing. And so, but, I spent the first couple of months of business school exploring different finance careers that I just mentioned, and really just kind of found myself getting bored looking into these different areas of the world, just for me personally. And I was at a presentation for a private wealth management group, and found myself talking to an investment banker who was there from the same platform. And I just remember thinking that the deals he was talking about sounded really exciting, really interesting. And I started to wonder, did I make too much of a snap decision about investment banking? And so I started talking to some of my fellow classmates who had done investment banking before school. And they were like, oh, you'd be great at investment banking. You should just look at the mid-market investment banks because, they're smaller. The role is a lot better in a lot of ways. The culture is usually better. And also a lot of them are based here in Chicago, which is where I wanted to be. And so I quickly pivoted to focus primarily on the mid-market and boutique investment banks, mostly here in the Midwest.
Okay, got it. So it was really that conversation you had at that event that got you kind of thinking a little bit longer about investment banking as a field, and ultimately decided to pursue it just in a little bit more focused way, it sounds like. And then so you landed a role, right? And then what happened next in terms of your professional experience right out of Kellogg?
Yeah, so I was able to land, even though I started my recruiting pretty late in the cycle, I was able to land an internship at a different bank than the one that I ultimately joined full time. I won't mention them by name, but it was effectively a mid-market investment banking group of a bulge bracket investment bank. So I thought I was getting kind of the best of both worlds, where I could work for a mid-market investment banking group, but also kind of have the cachet, if you will, of the bulge bracket name, which is one that everybody I think would recognize. And for the most part, I had a good experience over the summer. I worked on a lot of sell-side M&A, which I really enjoyed and hadn't gotten much exposure to up until the internship. But this particular bank, although it was the mid-market investment banking group, and that's what I wanted to focus on, it had very much the culture of an old school Wall Street investment bank, where it was a bit edgy, and it was what one might refer to these days as a bit of a a sweatshop, where look, in investment banking as an associate, you're going to work hard regardless of where you are. But there's some places where they take it, I think, to the extremes, even within the industry, and that was just the particular culture of this bank. And so I decided that I liked investment banking, I liked M&A, but I didn't think that platform was the best fit for me. And I had gotten to know Lincoln International very, very well during my recruiting. I actually did not get an offer from Lincoln, because Lincoln was my first choice for the summer. I didn't get an offer, but I went elsewhere. I had a positive summer and got a return offer, and then I came back to Lincoln to kind of give them the stamp of approval from another shop. And so, little anecdote I like to share with people: if you don't get your first choice on the first try, you can definitely get a second crack at it most of the time. And so that's how I ultimately landed here at Lincoln.
Awesome. Yeah, I did not know that story. So thanks for sharing that. And so you ultimately came to Lincoln, and what was it like? Like you worked in finance in all these other roles, from undergrad all the way up. You go to Kellogg, you have a great time, you're doing some exploring. You said, okay, mid-market banking, went to the first firm, was like, you know what? I liked it. I like what I'm doing, but maybe the way that I'm interacting with the people here isn't what I prefer. And then you went to Lincoln. What was it like now? You're a full-time associate on the desk doing deals. What was that like? And in particular, I'm curious about what your career progression was like over those next handful of years in terms of what kinds of things you were doing, and how did you grow as a person and as an investment banker over that period?
Yeah, so I came over to Lincoln full time, out of MBA, and I'd had the internship, and so I'd gotten a good amount of exposure to sell side M&A, which is the majority of what Lincoln focuses on here, and so I knew more or less what to expect in terms of the day to day. But after another year of business school, I got a little bit rusty. So when I first joined, it was kind of everything I thought it would be, in that it was definitely an exciting career, really interesting work for the most part. At a place like Lincoln, within the what historically we would refer to as the mid market, working significant amount of your time is on real live deals, and you are like front and center with clients. So, private equity deal teams and CEOs, CFOs, and other C-suite executives at these businesses. I was actually kind of blown away how quickly you're getting exposure working directly with those types of people, which was, that was what I was looking for in terms of coming to a, more of a mid-market type bank. But I was surprised how quickly I was dealing directly with these people, where, within the first month or two, I'm going to meetings with the management team, the entire management team, the original founders of these businesses, and, leading and participating in calls with the CFO, doing things like building out models. But at a high level, what I think is most interesting about investment banking is, you think about being an MBA student, I think it's the best and one of the most interesting ways to apply every single part of what you learn in school about the way that businesses run, without running the businesses themselves. And so, as a banker, when you're working on deals, you are learning about all kinds of different companies, different industries, especially in the earlier days, if you're more of a generalist like I was. And that, to me, is the most interesting part of banking, is that you learn about all this stuff in school, and then you come and you're working on 3 or 4 or 5 deals at any given time, and they're different companies, a lot of times they're different industries, or at least different industry segments. And so you're just learning so much about the way that the world works. And it was definitely a steep learning curve, even coming out of a finance role before. I still found it a bit jarring, quite honestly, how quickly everything moves in investment banking, because there's a big difference between being on the buy side, which is what I was, and the sell side, where you're dealing with clients, because clients are very demanding. They move very quickly. They expect very, very timely responses. And so everything moves much, much more quickly than I was accustomed to on the buy side. But I think you also asked about the career progression, and as a first year associate, really, I found that it took a lot longer to get up to speed than I had hoped. I think that it took me a good 6 to 9 months before I really felt like I kind of knew what I was doing. And probably it was really at that first year point where I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of what I needed to do. And so it is, most banks, it is very much an apprenticeship model, at least it is here at Lincoln. And so it is a very gradual progression up the learning curve, but it is without a doubt a steep learning curve, kind of regardless of what your background is, at least in my experience. And so, in terms of my career progression at the earlier stages, I was a full out generalist, where I was working on sell side M&A deals across multiple industries. Also, kind of a generalist from a product offering perspective, where I was also working with our capital advisory group here, doing debt capital raisings for private equity firms. And so, saw a little bit of everything over the first couple of years. Eventually gravitated towards our capital advisory group, primarily because of my background in debt before going into banking. My experience prior to business school was a little bit more translatable to that. And I liked doing it. I liked the whole debt world. And so I'm happy to elaborate, on kind of the career progression, but that's kind of some thoughts on the earlier days, if you will.
Yeah. No, thanks, Jon. You talked about getting up the learning curve, right? So it sounds like after that first year or so, you were more comfortable. You kind of knew what the expectations were. You're more comfortable in your ability to kind of do what you needed to do. Can you give an example of a deal that you learned from the most back during that period, and kind of what happened, and what were some things that you learned as a result of that particular moment in that deal?
Yeah. So the first deal that immediately comes to mind, honestly, is the very first deal that I was staffed on, which was kind of a industrial technology type deal is how I would describe it. It was a company based out on the West Coast in Oregon that they manufactured and designed and sold very, very, very high tech, what you would call cutting tools, which is a perfect example of a company that you would see in the mid market, where incredibly necessary company that's doing really interesting and critical things, but one that you would just never have even thought existed. And so they made very, very super highly engineered, and a lot of times customized cutting tools is what you would call it. So things like they're called flanges. So if you think about these massive wind turbines, just as an example, that you'd see, scattered throughout the countryside, there are before those wind turbines are installed, and sometimes after they're installed, they have to take the bottom of those gigantic towers, these metal towers, will get kind of dented up while they're being delivered or installed. And so you have to have this cutting tool that will kind of slice the end off. I don't know if I'm doing the greatest job explaining what this company does. But it's that's just one example of the kind of crazy machinery that these folks produced. And so they had all kinds of different tools that they manufactured that catered to all these kind of interesting end markets, like the wind turbine market, and they also had others that catered to, the very, very large industrial plants, just industrial equipment, and things like that. And so just a really interesting learning experience. It's a highly technical industrial company, understanding what is their strategy, why you applying a bunch of the stuff that you learn in business school, like why are you selling to these types of customers? Why you sell these types of products to those customers? Why not these? And so understanding their strategy and everything, and just learn a tremendous amount about that company and industry back in the day. And then the other interesting part about the deal was I realized very quickly how important soft skills and empathy are to the investment banking world and to investment bankers, even at very junior levels, which I had heard about it during recruiting, but kind of didn't believe it or didn't realize or appreciate how much there was involved. And so what I mean by that is, so when you're, not to go off on a tangent, but when you're selling a company, you're working hand in hand with the management team of that company, the CEO, the CFO, and whoever owns that company, which maybe it's a private equity firm, and maybe the CEO is the original founder and owns a lot of it. Sometimes it's kind of a combination of the two. You're dealing hand in hand with the CEO, CFO. For the most part, a lot of times these management teams are very, very sophisticated, and they've been through a sale process. They've worked with investment bankers before. A lot of times they really haven't. And if they have, maybe it's been once in their career. And so although these are, very high up C-level executives, like literally CEOs, CFOs, they are very much out of their element, out of their comfort zone when they're going through the process of selling the company outright, or even if they're going out and raising capital, whether it's debt or equity capital. Because these folks, if you think about it, their day-to-day job is they're managing a company, and they're describing this company and selling it to customers, but they are not accustomed to selling it to investors. And it really is a different language, a different way of thinking about things. And that's what investment bankers help with. And so going back to that deal, I realized very quickly you're dealing with real people, with big personalities, and you're dealing with a lot of emotions. And, when I thought about banking coming in, I thought, this is going to be a lot of very logical, and, super well educated people that you're working with. And they are in a lot of ways, but there's just a lot of emotion that you're dealing with, and people that you're dealing with as an investment banker. And I was just honestly kind of blown away by that. And so that is one of the other big things that I really learned quickly from that deal, is that, when you're a banker, you don't think about this, but similar in a lot of ways to consultants can be. You work with these people, and you kind of become sort of a professional therapist in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's great to hear that experience, and the fact that you kind of came in with a certain mindset, but being on the job, actually talking with clients, you learned, oh yeah, empathy, super important, right? Connecting with people. And of course, doing all of your due diligence and things that investment bankers do, and things that you prepared for in business school. Of course, you're still doing those things, but it sounds like it's really that combination that actually makes it work and helps you help the client in the best possible way.
Exactly.
So just want to touch on, before we wrap up, kind of where you're at now, and kind of what motivated your move. You made a change in your career. You rose through the ranks as a banker at Lincoln. and now you're director of talent. Kind of what went into that decision? Because a lot of people are thinking about banking and kind of what it entails, what their career trajectory potentially could look like, and then also from where you sit now, what kind of advice do you have for people looking to get into investment banking and even potentially interested in Lincoln?
Yeah. So it's a great question, one I get a lot. In terms of my career progression, it's not the most common path, I think, within the investment banking world. Like a lot of your listeners, I broke in as a post MBA associate, went through the full associate program, was able to be successful in that, got promoted to vice president. And so I was a vice president and then director for a couple of years. And so I was kind of right at the end of the road, if you will, kind of right at the last point before the last kind of big jump, which is to become a managing director. And I, for the most part, really enjoyed my career in banking. Got a lot of exposure to both sell side M&A and capital raising. Most of my senior banking career was on the capital advisory side, which I also really enjoyed. But after 9 years of being in banking, there were a couple of things. One was it just kind of got to the point where I've been in the deal world, between Lincoln and investment banking for 9 years plus basically 4 years before business school. And so it'd been a long time that I'd been in this deal world, and in a lot of ways it really appealed to my personality and kind of what I wanted to do. But I also kind of started to think, you get a little bit older and more mature and things like this. I started to wonder, I kind of just want to do something different after spending a lot of time in this area for a good 13, 14 years. Also, admittedly, I really liked deals and liked a lot of the activities that went into that. I started to lose a bit of my passion for catering to clients, and that's really just kind of a personality thing. And so I thought, maybe I should start to explore things, outside of banking, but really enjoyed the investment banking industry. I think it's incredibly interesting and dynamic, and love the fast-paced nature of it and just how much you can learn the world, if you will. And then at Lincoln International specifically, love the people, love the culture, really didn't want to leave. I also thought the firm was a very interesting inflection point in its growth story, in that we'd gone from practically a startup when I had joined the firm to very well established, top bank in the area that we focus, which is primarily in the mid market and catering to the private capital markets. But at the same time, had a very ambitious growth plan in mind that I thought was very exciting and one that I believed in. Top-notch leadership here. And so, before seriously, doing too much exploration outside the firm, my first idea was, I should look and see what opportunities might exist inside the firm. And I was wondering, maybe there's, more of a corporate, quote unquote, type position that could be interesting here at Lincoln. And in fact, my now boss who's the chief operating officer at Lincoln, she had started as an investment banker, and she was originally my staffer way back when I was an associate, and we became good friends, and I did a lot of recruiting with her at the MBA level. And so I was very, very familiar with the recruiting world within banking. And it's kind of a long story of how I arrived at it, but Lincoln's growing very quickly. We had a big need on the recruiting team. Also, just through my experience recruiting for Lincoln, I had a lot of ideas and opinions about how we could and should be doing things, how we could do things better. And at a place like Lincoln, where it is very entrepreneurial, if you have strong opinions and offer ideas, people will take you up on those ideas often a lot more quickly than you might expect. And so the longest, I guess the short version of the story is that I came up with an idea of, hey, what if I took everything that I learned on the investment banking side and what I know about recruiting and applied that to our talent team and specifically talent acquisition, and can really explore ways to improve the way that Lincoln goes about recruiting its people and professionalize it in a lot of ways. Because at an investment bank, the only asset that a company like Lincoln has is the people that are coming in and out the door, logging on and off their computer every day. And so I thought, this would be a really interesting way to help build, this firm and focus on more of a, corporate type role, but also, still be able to apply everything that I've learned over the years in the investment banking world. And I think the other aspect of it was I realized through recruiting as a banker, and also, when I was a director, when I'm out meeting with clients and trying to bring in deals and build relationships, I realized I really, really enjoyed that aspect of the job, and it started to not enjoy as much of the kind of execution of deals. And so I thought, well, talent acquisition is a good fit for that, because you're effectively selling and building relationships all the time. And so, I also kind of thought back to business school where, everyone kind of talks about, hey, don't go out and get a job, create your own job. And I realized pretty quickly it takes time to do that. But I, thinking back to that mindset, took everything that I learned about banking over the years and recruiting over the years and kind of pitched an idea internally of, hey, what if we created a new position where you got an experienced banker who now oversees the entire recruiting function. Whereas previously, with Lincoln almost like a startup, operating as a startup for many years, recruiting was just one major work stream of what our now COO is overseeing, which the amount of things that she was doing was incredible. And so I thought, it could really add some value to the firm by, having just a laser focus on recruiting, talent acquisition, and then building out a team to do that. And so a little bit of a long-winded story about how that transpired, but that in a nutshell is kind of how my career progressed. I ended up in this role as director of talent acquisition. I think the other part of your question was, what advice I have for students at this stage. And I think that, some advice that's top of mind right now, people, I think a lot of people who are listening are likely first year MBA students or maybe even undergraduate students are looking to break into banking at the early stages. And if they're first year MBA students, they're getting really close to formal interviews and things like this. And so, what I would, just some off the cuff advice I have people, heading into kind of the final stages of trying to break in is, you want to know yourself, you want to know your story. You want to focus on the big picture, which is, being able to tell a story to investment bankers, recruiters at these firms of, hey, here's what I really liked about my previous experiences before business school. Here's what I'm really good at. And here's how that is going to translate in investment banking. It's going to be a little bit of a different story for everyone. But you just want to make it a succinct, logical, believable, if you will, plausible story. I think that another thing that folks want to focus on is, look, everyone is just trying to break in, get an opportunity, which should certainly be everyone's, singular focus, but you also want to be focused on being, landing at the right place, because there's a lot of different, investment banks out there, and there's a big difference between the experience at, say, a mid-market bank versus a bulge bracket bank, and there's a pretty big difference between, kind of the elite boutiques in both bulge brackets or mid-market. And, if you're talking about within bulge brackets, even, whether you're on an M&A execution team versus industry coverage team, on really kind of understanding what are the differences between those and what fits best for you. And I realize that it's difficult to kind of understand what real differences are, what the day-to-day really looks like. Because you talk to a lot of investment bankers, and I think that thinking back to my recruiting days, it's hard to kind of cut through the BS because a lot of them are in sale mode all of the time. My angle on recruiting is I try to be very upfront, honest, and authentic because I think that people really crave that, and that's just my approach to doing things. It's just the way I like to do things. But you just want to try and kind of cut through the sales pitch, for lack of a better description. And honestly, one of the best ways I found to do that is, if you're at these top MBA programs, there's a bunch of people who did investment banking, who worked in investment banking prior to school, and they're looking to, try to change course and do something different. And that's a really easy way to get unfiltered views on what the job's really like. Now, I will caution people that it's usually most of those people went through the analyst program, and that can kind of be a different experience. And so you want to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. Another way of saying it is you don't want to let your classmates discourage you too much from banking because they may have a little bit of a jaded view, based on their experience. But if you want to understand what the day-to-day is like, I found that you'll get painfully honest description of that. And so that's a really good resource to have. And there's no pressure, right, when you're talking to your fellow classmates. Another piece of advice I would say is every investment bank, regardless of what type of shop, what group, a really big thing that they're looking for, whether they ask you directly or not, I guarantee that everyone has it in the back of their mind, is, does this person have, the work ethic and the horsepower, so to speak, to be successful in investment banking? Do they really want it? Because, kind of going back to the approach I described, of just being honest and upfront. I don't like to sugarcoat it. The associate job in investment banking it's a very difficult position. It will push most people pretty much to their limits, because there's a lot going on at any given point in time. It moves very, very quickly. You're dealing with very highly demanding clients. And so it's hard and it's intense. And I think that's why a lot of people want to do it, because it's a challenge, and not everyone can do it. And I'm thinking specifically about the associate role, because I do think it gets better after that. But the point I'm trying to make about my advice here is, in order to be a successful associate and kind of get through the grind that can be the associate role and be successful and get promoted to vice president, you got to have a strong work ethic, and you have to have a really strong desire to succeed. And so it's really easy to, if you get asked that question directly in an interview, it's easy to say, well, I work really hard and, I want this and I want that. Well, the best candidates that I interview, and I interview countless of them, they can say it, and then they've got 2 or 3 concrete examples of what they've done in the past, that whether it's, hey, this is a failure that I had in the past, and I'm going to learn from that mistake and never let it happen again. And that kind of motivates me. Or 2, I'm a really driven and determined person, and here are 2 or 3 examples of that in the past. Because a lot of people will say, yeah, hey, I know it, I get it. I know that, in banking, I'm working 70, 80 plus hours a week and working at night and sometimes over the weekends. I know that that's coming, and I'm not afraid. Well, that's great. But if you can give me really concrete examples and deliver it forcefully, without going over the top, that is the best way to go about that, because I think that a lot of people forget that in the back of their minds, virtually every banker, every recruiter, every interviewer, whether sometimes they'll ask it really directly, but a lot of times they won't ask it at all. But I guarantee that it is a major, major question they have in the back of their minds. And so that's my biggest piece of advice, I think, heading into interviews and landing a spot is, knowing your story, does it make sense, have it succinct, understanding where you're going to fit best and why. And that means you're going to have a little bit different sales pitch for each of the types of places you're interviewing if you're kind of casting a wide net. And then being able to convincingly say, hey, I've got the work ethic and the determination to do this and succeed. And if you're able to do those things, I think there's a very good chance that you land something and that you're ultimately successful.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that was a lot of great advice there, Jon. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think those are the kinds of things that people are wondering. And one thing I noticed, you didn't necessarily say, master your technicals and do all those kinds of things, which I know a lot of people are focused on. Obviously, those things are important. You have to demonstrate a level of competence and a level of knowledge. But I do think a lot of candidates, unfortunately, underweight the ability to share their story, the ability to demonstrate through evidence their tenacity and their desire for this, which I'm really glad that you highlighted that, because I think that that's something that often gets overlooked, especially in an academic environment, whether it's undergraduate or MBA. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Jon.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself, and I didn't say it outright, but nothing surprises me more than when I talk to really sophisticated, incredibly intelligent MBA students, and they kind of blow the first couple of questions, about what their story is, why banking, why Lincoln specifically, or whatever bank you're talking to, and I always suspect it's because they spent the last 2 weeks cramming for technicals, and that's all they spent their time doing, to the point where they totally lost sight of what the story is. So technicals are certainly important, but those are coming. You really don't want to lose sight of the bigger picture. It is exactly as you described it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Jon, it's been amazing having you here on the show. Really appreciate you sharing not only your story coming up in finance and as a banker, but also from where you sit now as a director of talent at Lincoln, and from the recruiting perspective. I think it's truly unique. And so thank you for joining us. Where can people, either contact you or get to know more about Lincoln? I'm happy to drop a link here in the show notes of the episode. Whatever is the best way for people to get in contact or learn more.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the easiest way, I think, to brush up on Lincoln International is just hitting up our website, and people are always welcome to reach out to me directly. My email is jparis at lincolninternational.com. These days in the current recruiting environment might take me a little bit longer to respond to folks than normal, but I try my best to get back to everyone who does reach out to me, and so always happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jon. Appreciate you, and I hope it's a lovely day out there in Chicago. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks very much. Take care.